From WHQR Public Media, this is The Newsroom. I'm Ben Schachman. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, I'm sitting down with Mike Fanta, who served on the Wilmington Police Department for almost 3 decades. In the last days of his career, he filed a complaint against Chief Donny Williams. Among other things, Fanta's complaint details incidents of harassment, intimidation, and mismanagement over Williams' 4 years as chief. Fanta alleged that Williams consistently insulted him and other top brass, questioning their ethics, ignoring their input, and accusing them of undermining him, sometimes with the implication of racism. One flashpoint disagreement, which Fanta detailed in his complaint, was putting Vice detectives on paid leave early in the COVID pandemic when Williams was acting chief. Some of those detectives were then moved to the Community Compliance Unit, essentially serving as plainclothes scouts for businesses to see if they were obeying the new COVID regulations that were being rolled out at the time. We've largely confirmed that that did happen. Fanta also said he complied with Williams' order, but when he raised concerns about how the decision could impact the public's faith in the department, he was met with hostile pushback and accused of insubordination. But that's an allegation. Fanta's complaint led to a $75,000 third-party investigation of Chief Williams this summer. Fanta, who had since retired, was informed by the city's HR department that at least some of his complaints had been sustained, and city officials, including Mayor Bill Saffo, have told me they are taking appropriate action. But it remains unclear what that actually means. City Manager Tony Caudill has declined to release the report from the investigation, even to City Council, claiming it is protected by state law. And while that's true, that law also has a caveat that allows officials to release personnel information if it is, quote, essential to maintaining public confidence. It is, in fact, the caveat that allowed Chief Williams and City Council to release information, including written excerpts of audio recordings, about James Gilmore, Jesse Moore, and Kevin Piner, 3 racist officers who were fired back in 2020 on Williams' first day as the city's first black police chief. Not releasing the report has left plenty of space for speculation and has done little to quell racial tensions. Leaders of the black community in Wilmington, including the local NAACP and the National Black Leadership Caucus, have argued that criticism of Williams is racially motivated, and they've dismissed even the sustained complaints against them, although, like me, they've never had a chance to read the report. Williams recently held a press conference to address some of these claims. He told me he hasn't read the report and said there were some aspects of it that he would not discuss because they concerned personnel issues. But he did argue that systemic racism is alive and well in his department, and he said point blank that he felt the allegations made by Fanta, who is white, were racially motivated. As evidence, Williams pointed to one of Fanta's complaints about a plexiglass container that sits in the chief's office labeled the Box of Shame. It contains the badges of Gilmore, Moore, and Piner. Williams said anyone who complained about the shaming of overt racists, some of whom threatened horrific violence against the black community, must be racially biased themselves. Williams also brought Deputy Chief Kelvin Hargrove, who recently rejoined the department, to the press meeting. Hargrove explained why he felt Fanta's criticism of his promotion was also racially biased, because Fanta complained that a so-called janitor, who was a black man, served on Hargrove's promotional committee. Now, Fanta categorically denies that he's a racist, and has said anyone leveling that allegation at him, including Chief Williams, could face a defamation suit. As he explains in this interview, he saw the badges as part of Williams' larger campaign of intimidation. And he says his criticism of Hargrove's promotion had nothing to do with race, but acknowledged his disagreement with the process did end their decades-long friendship. He also noted that his complaint named high-ranking black and Hispanic officers as witnesses. Whatever you think of Fanta's allegations, I think it's fair to say there was more going on in his complaint than was captured in most of the reporting, including mine. So I agreed to sit down for an hour-long interview, which you're about to hear. We're presenting this essentially as we recorded it, with just a few moments where I added some notes for clarity or context. And a quick note before we get started, if you're coming to this story fresh and you don't have much backstory, I recommend you check out the show notes for some key links to past reporting. Also, this interview does contain some adult language, so listener caution is advised. Okay, Here is our interview, starting with me asking Fanta for a brief overview of his time at the Wilmington Police Department.
Basic bio is that I was at UNCW majoring in criminal justice in the Army Reserves. Started getting an interest in law enforcement, and one of the UNCW professors could tell that I wasn't really thrilled with the UNCW environment, so he just said, "Why don't you take a break and go to Cape Fear Community College, take BLET, and maybe hit the ground running as a cop, and then you can always come back later and finish your degree." And as soon as he walked me through the process, I was like, "That's probably the best route to go." So went through BLET in the spring of '94. By the spring of '95, I'm hired by the police department. First 5 years were patrol division, variety of shifts, mainly West Side night shift. Then I get into special operations street teams, which they keep changing the name of the team, but at that time it was PAT. I would say approximately 3 years of special operations street teams. I was unfortunately forced to go to detective division. That was 2 years in detective division. Just wasn't my cup of tea. Worked general investigations. At year 10, I tested for sergeant and miracled into that, which changed my perspective towards the department, because I never thought myself being in a leadership position. I go through the testing, never anticipated actually doing well in it because I'd never tested before. So one day I'm driving down the road now as a sergeant, and the job really got like a boost in my enthusiasm. Did mostly patrol as a sergeant. My sergeant stint was short. Did full-time SWAT for approximately a year. Went back to special operations street teams. Did that as a sergeant. 4 years as a sergeant, so it went by quick. Tested for a lieutenant. Again, never anticipated getting promoted to lieutenant. Don't know why I tested for lieutenant, because it really wasn't something I was, excited about. But year 14, I get promoted to lieutenant, which was, kind of ahead of schedule at the time. But lieutenant was also great because, majority of my time as lieutenant was watch commander, which gives you the freedom of roaming the entire city, picking calls, working with a bunch of, primarily night shift. Patrol was my environment, where my heart was. So now, having the opportunity of being the watch commander and just roaming the city from call to call, and going to the cool stuff, working with great people, having fun. It was a great run. I go into Vice Narcotics as a lieutenant. Had a great run there because we had some of the the best detectives that I'd ever worked with. And best supervisor I'd ever worked with. They made my job exceptionally easy because they were extremely competent, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of camaraderie. So did that for approximately 2 or 3 years. Then for some reason decided I needed to test for captain, because at that point I realized that I was coming towards the end of my career. So had a couple runs testing for captain. Did not excel in the testing because it really was more like upper management, and it really was not where my heart was. But eventually I miracled into captain under Evangelist right at the end of his administration, and I don't know it's the end of his administration. So I would say approximately maybe 6 to 7 months working as a captain under him, and I got, of course, also my time as lieutenant, I got to see how he ran the department when it came to command staff, so that gave me a concept of what command staff was. But, to kind of go into some of these accusations that are being made, by the time Evangelist's term is coming to the end, I'm probably on his top of his list as the most confrontational thorn on in his side. It was well known throughout the department. The people that are making accusations against me clearly knew that the most combative leadership person in the department when it came to Chief Evangelist was me. Evangelist knew it. We had confrontations. We've discussed it even since then. He had been there a long time. I thought he had surrounded himself with the wrong people, and any leader that's been in a position for too long starts to sour, in the minds of the people in and around him, because they become kind of stale, stagnant. Things weren't changing. So it got really heated between me and Evangelist to where we really didn't even want to be in the room with each other, and so that's why it's kind of surprising now that those same people that are making accusations about me not wanting, insinuating that, Fanta just didn't like black leadership. I'm like, you guys sat there and Donny, Williams, and Hargrove 110% know of my problems with Evangelist and how bad it got. So, and there's also witnesses that know that towards the end of Evangelist's tenure, I'm literally pushing the guy out the door, wanting him to go. And people had come to me and said, well, be careful what you ask for. Everybody knew that, Chief Williams was in a great position to take over the agency. And again, this guy that they're now saying is a racist was saying, I'm perfectly fine with Donny taking over. I want a new direction. And if that's what it takes, then let's go with it. I'm willing to give anybody a shot. So when Chief Evangelist announced his retirement, to me it was a plus, because I was like, here we go, something different. And, with Chief Williams, again, it was kind of a mixed bag with him throughout my career. A lot of bad stuff, but again, every single time as people move into different positions in the department, you'll see sometimes they shine in certain positions and sometimes they fail miserably. So more than happy to see a change in direction. Chief Williams officially takes over, right at the time where it's like peak, like probably one of the worst times in law enforcement, like nationally, because you got BLM, George Floyd, and then internally you have the Pioneer Moore. Tape is released. Me and Hargrove went together to IA and got access to it. They allowed us to listen to it, so we sat there together. So again, a little surprising that he's going to be making these comments about me, because he knows my feelings about that.
Can I ask a little bit about that particular time frame? I mean, what I've heard from officers is just that morale was really low. They felt like the public was disrespectful or disinterested in law enforcement, that you're, people actively calling you bastards in the streets. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, I mean, and this is the thing, is and I've given compliments to, people before, is our city didn't do as bad as others. Okay. And that's because of a lot of the work in the community. All right. So we had the headache downtown. But overall, compared to what the nation was seeing, it affected our morale to see the entire profession being trashed by politicians, pundits, and, the elites and, celebrities. So that really destroyed your morale and your mindset towards the profession.
Defund the police type stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Defund the police, and then just, talk, the constantly pushing the narrative that we're out there just like hunting black people in the streets. Yeah. It just was, it was exhausting. But of course, I'm not like at the front of the line here, like these are. At that point, I'm a captain, but so it didn't affect me as much compared to the officers that are out there answering calls every day, or the men and women that were on MFFD, which is the civil disturbance, the ones that are having to be downtown. I was working as like an incident command situation, having to be an incident command, dealing with the downtown stuff. But my perspective, I thought overall it could have been worse.
Yeah.
But again, nationally seeing it got to the point and realizing that I need to go. Like my time's done. It was, a couple more years to go. It made you really, rethink like the long-term enthusiasm towards the profession. So that's where, it affected me at that point. Also realizing that because of what was occurring nationally, and then Chief Williams coming in, and the one thing that like we are kind of polar opposites in the law enforcement spectrum, and we've had like arguments and discussions over the year, few of them, but I remember one I had face-to-face with him when he was assistant chief. When I was requesting to speak to Chief Evangelist, I met with him first, out of the professional courtesy, and because at that point I wanted to confront Evangelist about some of the things he was saying about me behind my back, and then me and Assistant Chief Williams at the time had a healthy, friendly debate. It was more of agree to disagree, different perspectives. I'm more on the law and order perspective. I'm an operational guy at heart, want to be out on the street. He's more administrative, community engagement. So, throughout our career, we're definitely in different perspectives. So, that was a hard time. And then, realizing that some of the policies or systems that are going to be implemented, are not necessarily what I would, prioritize, because when you're a law and order guy and violent crime is at its peak at that point, I still want to concentrate on that. I don't want to step back. And I felt like we were stepping back. And then also seeing the morale of the agency, it's affecting the performance of units that will be tackling the violent crime, because they're all affected by, one, there was excessive amount of overtime at that time because of the downtown issue, then also the amount of shot spotter activations we were having. So I was wearing everybody down. Again, I was the captain over Vice at the time. It was his decisions, again, were polar opposite of why, kind of affected the ability for me to lead that unit, which again, I was trying to prioritize, violent crime, especially again with how bad the gunfire was at the time. But that's when I started seeing the beginning of the change in how he handled command staff versus like the previous administration.
Right.
And with any new leader, you give him a little bit of room to maneuver, and you kind of have to set back and just say, you allow someone to grow, like, whether it's him or anybody else. Sometime a new lieutenant, a new captain, a new sergeant comes in, and they immediately like hit the ground running, where you're like, you're wanting to tell them like, hey buddy, like you might want to chill a little bit, you're pissing people off, or, getting a little bit ahead of yourself. So I'm, willing to, kind of sitting back and watching, but his like statements that he would make to us, again, the threats was troubling to me. He starts like making threats immediately, and that's not a way to build like team concept and trust. And one of the ones I always quote him on is he said, like he's more than willing to use the powers that no previous chief has ever used to make an example of a command staff member, and willing to test civil service. So,
and just for people who don't know, civil service is the board that kind of reviews decisions to fire officers,
yeah,
or demote them or something like
Correct.
that.
Correct. So with over 30-day suspension, demotion, termination goes before civil service, And so we do have that kind of protection, but also, it's not something, it's a very long process. And so especially if you're terminated, it's months and months, even longer sometimes, to try to fight the good fight to get things, back in order. So that was a little scary, because again, we've had these professional disagreements over the years, and he's talking basically, it's almost like it's the subversion, undermining, where there's no specifics. He's throwing it out there to all of us. And so pretty much everybody in the room's looking around thinking, is he talking about me? Because he's not dealing with us individually and sitting down with us, and discussing maybe subversion or undermining. He's basically blanket threatening the entire command staff.
So give me a little bit of a visual here. What are these situations like? Is it's in a room? It's at this point, Chief Williams, you.
It's generally in the blue room, which where we have most of our meetings. It's all division commanders, which is the 6 captains. You have at that time, which all depends. How it fluctuates between how many deputy chiefs you'll have. Legal there sometimes. Different other positions like the internal affairs lieutenant, the lieutenant that's over the PIO, but it's mainly the 6 captains and the chiefs. And then there's a few other people that are part of it.
Gotcha.
So, that was troubling, the threats. And then he immediately starts implementing the system where he starts stripping pretty much all of us of the general duties that previous division commanders had.
And this included things like assigning vehicles and weaponry
and specialized assignments,
yeah,
which would be like transfers and stuff like that. You generally have as a captain before, for instance, you would have an opinion or say so, not total control, but your voice would be, part of, if you're getting a new sergeant, new lieutenant, new detective, you're part of that process. And of course there was a specific process for specialized assignments, where you'd have a review board, and then you would have supervisory recommendations, an IA audit, so there was a process where if somebody wanted to be a detective, they would apply and they would go through this process, then you would rank them, and then of course the captains would have input on that. He comes in, strips us of all that. Not immediately, but it was pretty quick. So with that, when he strips us of that, he would give us often this discussion where he had been watching us all for years, is what he would say. As again, we're in this room. He knows what we were doing, and then we're like, okay, so you're accusing us of stuff.
And the implication here was that there was a good old boy network,
Yes.
if not an explicitly racist group of white cops who were hooking each other up.
He would sometimes breach like the occasion, like he would point out traditional all white male units. Like that was the rare time that he would go like racial. It was mainly what he would say is buddy hookups, which of course the first time he mentions buddy hookups, I had no idea. I'd never heard that term. I thought he was talking about people like fooling around with each other because he was talking about all the buddy hookups to the department. I was like, what are you talking about? But so it's kind of funny when I finally realized what he was talking about. So again, he's directly, like they quote me saying he said we don't have moral compass. No, that's how I took it. All right. Because when you're constantly, and again, this is a long process over years that he would bring this up over and over again. When you walk into a room with a group of professionals and the room is packed with, again, like 20 plus year veterans of a wide variety of experience and training, and you're directly saying, I've been watching you all for years. I know what you've all been doing. And then you're saying that, like, if, for instance, this new gun comes out, if I wouldn't have been controlling it, I know you guys would have been walking around with it. Or he gives us the conversation about if he wasn't controlling the fleet, like vehicle assignments, that we would be taking all the great cars, or we would be giving the great cars and the new cars to our friends.
Yeah, the example I heard was there was like a slimline Glock. It was
that was one of the last meetings where that was, again, what was really fun, not really funny in a sad way. But that's when I had confronted him a couple days before and begged him to stop this, and told him, this is how we're taking this. It's causing this toxic environment. So I told him, I was like, you can't constantly be telling us that we're going to be taking stuff or that we're going to be giving it to our buddies. And I asked in that meeting, which I recorded, just FYI, I'm like, give me a specific example. Because he had been accusing me and all of us for years of all these different things. So I'm like, give me a specific example of how you watched me over the years and you saw me manipulating a specialized assignment, vehicle selection, or a piece of gear. And he said he doesn't have one. I said, okay, let's branch this out. Give me a specific example of somebody currently on command staff that has done that. He doesn't have it. So that's why I was like, you got to stop.
Yeah.
And what you need to do is if you see something like that or you think something like that has occurred, you pull that person in individually with their supervisor, you have a conversation about it. Now, if you find out that that's what they did, you deal with that one individual. But you can't be doing this blanket punishment of everybody as soon as you hit the ground running as a chief.
Now, let me ask you, did you ever see any behavior like that happen? I mean, maybe not systemically, but did you ever watch, a senior officer hook up someone because they were, personal
Well,
friends?
of course, you're seeing it from a distance, and that was the conversation I had with him. He had that reputation for a long time. He was infamous, in the rumor mill for manipulating vehicle fleet when he was the support captain for years. And I gave him a specific example of a car that he took for himself that was brand new, and a deputy chief and an entire command group told me that he had taken it from a detective that was going to get it. Now, when I challenged him on that, he denied it, and he said that's a lie. But then I'm like, exactly, okay, say that is. And that's when I looked at him, I was like, so when you were looking at a distance and you saw one of us do it, maybe you also didn't have all the facts. Because maybe we were all wrong about that vehicle that he took for himself. I understand that there's a possibility with that. But at the same time, again, throughout your career, as you're watching this, you don't have all the information. But of course he interrupts me and says, Mike, yes, I do. He's not going to give me that, maybe yes, in certain circumstances, I could have been wrong. I'm willing to say I could have been wrong about that, but that's the information I had at the time. Right. So, now, no, I've never seen that directly as far as specialized assignments. I mean, every single division commander I would have, every lieutenant sergeant, they generally want the best person to work with. Now some of them might be kind of biased towards someone that they've worked with for years and they're kind of more friendly to, and we all have those kind of biases. But again, there was a system in place to where a captain's not just hand-picking people. It's a review board, cross-section of people on that review board. It's a process, and there's oversight all the way up the chain of command. He thinks, again, he's accusing us of manipulating it, but again, great, but give me specific examples. And again, he's unable to give, specific examples. There's, whether again it's fleet, we have, I don't know how many cars we have in the fleet, but it's hundreds.
Yeah.
And again, guns, gear, and stuff like that. So, again, it's constantly insulting because again, he's insulting, again, my moral compass. He's like, hey, if I wasn't controlling the decisions that you can make, you would be doing it for your own benefit.
And this is being said kind of to a room full of top brass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, everybody's there.
I want to ask you about another one of the complaints that you included in your HR complaint, and we'll have some backstory on that.
Gotcha.
Prior to this. But it has to do with during COVID, basically sending Bison Narcotics home and then kind of reassigning them. Can you walk me through what happened with that?
So, the crazy world of COVID was that, somehow the Vice narcotics detective, right at the height of fentanyl and then gun violence, were sent home as non-essential. It was really, disgusting, to have that happen. Great time. Hey, you're paying me to sit at home. But, the detectives and the supervisors in that unit were pretty frustrated by it because they're not the type of people that want to just go home and just hang out. So that ability to take on those vital, investigations is totally hindered. But I get an email at the height again of COVID that I am to reassign. I'm guessing at this point it was 4 to 6 detectives, and they were to be sent over to the community compliance unit, which was a unit that the chief personally had created to deal with COVID enforcement of governor's orders. And they used it, the example of what they were going to be working on, I believe it was called the Charlotte model. It was how car dealerships were not allowed to be giving test drives. And that they were going to have plainclothes detectives go to dealerships and request test drives. So I'm very frustrated at that point, put it mildly, because at that point, again, you're not going to allow us to fight the war on drugs and fentanyl and the violent crime, the gun violence, but you're going to be inputting detectives to go to car dealerships because of some governor's order. So I went to the supervisors, gave them the order. Of course, I expressed my concerns to them, but I said, this is coming from the chief. This is when you're to report. So at that point, because it's the height of COVID, we were Zoom calling command staff meetings. And so the chief, brings up the community compliance unit. He is now talking about, quote unquote, my personnel, the vice personnel being reassigned to it. And he expands their orders now, saying that they will also be going into local businesses to make sure that they're compliant with these governor's orders.
And they're going in as plainclothes.
Yes. They were to go in and recon it. And if they found out they were out of compliance, they were to call in the marked units for enforcement or education or whatever they called it. To me, that was extremely troubling. At that point, I'd already known that we weren't allowed really to voice our opinion, but I unmuted and basically said, sir, I have some concerns. And I said that it's kind of troubling, and I don't think the citizens would support, those type of measures. And it wasn't that long until he immediately abruptly interrupts me, basically yelling at me, and says, we will have a sidebar conversation for that. And he ends the conversation. At the end of that Zoom call, he calls me up, and he is enraged, yelling at me, basically calling me insubordinate, which I kept on saying, so, I'm not going to yell at him. I'm not going to curse at him. But I'm saying, sir, with all due respect, those personnel were ordered to be there. They're there now. So that's not insubordination. I'm expressing concerns about the direction that we're going locally and nationally with these COVID orders. That city legal had already said that these governor's orders were changing on a day-to-day basis, and that it was going to be very difficult, with a constitution to be enforcing these. So I thought it was a waste of resources, especially when we're supposed to be tackling violent crime and fentanyl. And then also, it was a troubling direction I saw us going in, and I basically told him that where I would cross the line is I would not allow, I personally would not be involved in enforcement. At that point, he's basically saying I'm being insubordinate. I said, well, I don't have to obey every order. It's, unlawful orders. And I thought if we moved in the direction of enforcement of these COVID restrictions, that it would be an unlawful order, and that I would allow my personnel to make those same decisions if they chose to do so. It was a brutal conversation. It was very, very scary because, again, this is when he's already, had made threats. And he said something. He ends the conversation saying, "We'll see about this. I'm going to call the city manager right now." And that to me, like, I've never heard that before. That to me is like demotion, suspension, termination, because he's saying directly, "I'm being insubordinate," and I keep on interrupting professionally and saying, "Sir, the personnel are there. I'm just expressing my concerns as I should be authorized to do." So he had me sit at the house for like hours. I called up my deputy chief at the time. I said, "I think I just took one for the team. I don't know what's going to be, happening at the end of this day." But I really, at that point, was realizing I was like my whole ability to even express legitimate concerns is coming to an end.
Just a note here, we understand that Chief Williams and Captain Fanta disagreed about this issue, and they would probably each construe their interactions pretty differently. However, WPD did not dispute Fanta's claims that detectives were sent home during COVID and confirmed that they did work with uniformed officers as part of the community compliance unit. How much longer after that did this protocol stay in place? This having the plainclothes detectives as part of the COVID compliance unit?
It was a while, but of course, not saying they were being insubordinate, but they weren't necessarily enthusiastic about the role.
And the rules were changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to ask, Williams didn't address this specifically, but he did, when we met with him a couple weeks ago, mention that he was open to pushback, but not after a decision had been made.
Well, and of course, from my perspective, it causes like a chuckle, because you're like, you walk into almost every meeting and all decisions are already made. He doesn't bring things to us to discuss, rarely. Critical issues, he's already decided. So of course, for him to say, I don't want any discussion after I already decided, all of us, I guarantee you, if you interviewed the entire command staff, almost every single one would be like, well, that's kind of ridiculous because we are not involved in the discussion anyway. So therefore, yes, you're admitting to the fact that we don't ever get to voice our opinion, because he's almost making every decision, and again, we're not even in the room,
I mean, I take part of it was that you were not a huge fan of some of the COVID regulations, but you also had some concerns about the public's relationship with law enforcement if they found out this specifically was how vice and narcotics detectives were being used.
Yeah, because again, like if I'm a citizen of Wilmington, I would be, especially at that time with the shot spotter, activation and the violence, to know that the people, the men and women that are point on that and the best ones, to help tackle that issue are being, one, stay at home, and then two, sent over to a COVID compliance unit.
Do you know how many detectives total were sent home?
Well, both divisions were.
How many people?
Jeez, I'd be totally guessing. I don't know, 40 to 50?
Okay, yeah.
Because you have all of, criminal investigations, which is, your property crimes, violent crimes, fraud, all of them were sent home. And then, all of ICE, which is your task force officers and your narcotics officers. So we were all sent home. Great opportunity for me to be with my family, though. So I did appreciate that. But, it wasn't, it was very, I would have to say it was insulting, I just couldn't, you'd wake up that day and realize, hey, I get to hang out here, but it's like you realize, like deep down in your stomach, you're like, this is kind of disgusting,
So one of the last parts of your complaints I want to get to here is the issue of this bowl or a cube.
Yeah.
It's a plexiglass cube in Williams' office. When I saw it, it was on the bookshelf. I don't know where it was when you saw it.
Initially, it was on that like round table when you walk in there.
Yeah.
But that was at the beginning, again, probably 2 to 3 years ago.
And the story, the part that everyone agrees on is that it's a plexiglass container and it's got badges and ID cards on it. When I saw it, it had the 3 fired officers from 2020. And you felt like this was, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you felt like this was an intimidation tactic.
Yeah, I mean, because again, this is like my perspective on it is one, when I walk in an office, I'm not digging through to see how many there are. I could tell there's a big, and I call it a bowl. But my argument if that was only because of those officers, why do you have a huge bowl? How many badges and IDs do you think can fill that thing?
It is much bigger than the 3.
50, 60?
Yeah.
So to me, that's a message. I'm willing to take more, and I want more. And in a professional environment, everybody that was in and around me know that I would never support any of the actions that those officers had taken. I immediately recognized what they were done and that they rightfully were terminated. I sat there and had to listen to what they said. One of the first ones to listen to what they said. So again, for anybody that's listening to this, to insinuate that, again, be careful about what you're saying out in public.
Well, to that point, I mean, Chief Williams brought the press into his office, and one of the explicit purposes of that meeting was to discuss this claim about the bull. And his allegation, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that because those badges represented, officers who brought shame on the office through their racist comments, that if you complain about that, you must be taking their side.
No, again, that's a childish response, and I would say that to his face, is that one, again, in a professional environment, to me, it's nothing to be proud of, all right? It's one of these things that those guys were there for over a decade.
20 years.
So where was the problem in this one? Was it recruiting, or was it supervision? Are you telling me that was the first and only time? No. So it's not something that I would have been happy about. I mean, yes, they rightfully were terminated, but at the same time, these weren't rookies, and it was a mistake made along the process for years, potentially. And in a professional environment, this is where we would, agree to disagree. In a professional environment, you don't display those in your office. I don't care what they did, what anybody did. I can't imagine a world where I'm in a leadership position that I would terminate someone and then keep a memento from it and put it on display. And again, that's a huge bowl. If you'd have taken the badges and individually placed them on his bookshelf, that's a different conversation. I still would have disagreed with it, but again, that's not the message that we got. Because again, what I said before is I'm also tying this with the fact that he's walking into this professional environment and directly threatening us. So he's directly threatening us with termination, discussing undermining, subversion, which, again, very subjective in his world, because he just takes that as you having a different opinion. So, and then you walk into this and you look over your shoulder and you see this huge bowl, whatever it is, with a handful of badges at the bottom. Again, that sends a message of that, hey, I want a lot more of these, because why did you put this in this huge bowl? I mean, you could, again, have 50, 60, 70 badges in it. So I just, but again, I think deep down they know that by me having problems with it, it's not me defending the actions or the comments of those officers. Again, this is a childish response by people in a leadership position that, just they're lashing out again, or trying to, deflect from the real issue,
I do want to ask you, because you've mentioned it twice, about early on where you and Kelvin Hargrove went to IA and watched the recording from the vehicle.
Correct.
What was that like?
It was brutal. It's hard to talk about. So, just, that day when, we got briefed on it was bad enough. Because I just, it was a synopsis, and I went back to my division. I couldn't even talk about it because I realized how bad this is for our agency. So, and then sitting next, to Hargrove and us having to listen to it, it's very surreal because I never directly worked with those officers, past them in the hallway, kind of BSing with them with occasions, but you still feel like people, especially when you're working with, they were on the agency for, again, 10, 15 years.
They're colleagues.
But to hear their voices and then knowing it's in one of our police cars in our city, again, when you see this from another agency, it doesn't really have an impact with me, because I'm always like, if it's in some other city, Los Angeles, Detroit, I'm like, that's their problem. I never got into this whole emotional reaction to incidences that occur like nationally, because I was more just focused on Wilmington. And again, if it wasn't part of Wilmington, then I'm not gonna, sometimes you take learning lessons off of certain things, but it didn't, again, have like that kind of impact. But that, like, it really hit hard. And then, to hear that coming from them, and then it sounds like somebody that could be like in the 1960s Alabama KKK or something. And then now you're hearing this coming from people that, again, you passed in the hallways, so it was a, bad time in my career. At that point, again, I was just like, again, it's kind of a shame of like, how did I miss that? Like, you just don't, I don't know, it's hard to accept.
Up next, in just a moment, I asked Fanta to react to statements Kelvin Hargrove had made during a press conference recently held by Chief Williams. Hargrove had been on the force for a long time, earning the respect of many officers, including Fanta. Hargrove retired and made an unsuccessful attempt to unseat Sheriff Ed McMahon in the 2022 Democratic primary. The following summer, he returned to the Wilmington Police Department as deputy chief. The process for this promotion involves a committee, which features people who are sworn officers, non-sworn departmental employees, and people from outside WPD. It's been a bone of contention for some WPD officers for some time, and officers have told me they dislike it because it lacks transparency or because they don't think non-sworn officers should be making promotional decisions, and sometimes both. The approach has been used since around 2017 for deputy chief positions, but has been expanded since Williams' tenure as chief began. Many, including president of the state NAACP Deborah Dix-Maxwell, who sat on one of these committees, have defended the practice. As you'll hear in a moment, Fanta was one of the officers who disliked this committee style. But while he complained about 3 committee members, Hargrove focused on Fanta's objection to a janitor when he spoke to the press. Because the janitor was black, Hargrove argued that the objection was tainted by racism, which Fanta denies. So related to that, one of the other parts of this press meeting with Chief Williams was having Hargrove come in and talk about his return to the force and some of your final interactions.
Yep, which he totally misconstrued purposely.
Well, I wanted to give you the chance to sort of give your side of that.
Well, that one stung because, again, like he mentions, we were friends since the very beginning. We were, the original 9 that were selected for SWAT in 1999, and we went active in 2000. I worked under him. He was sergeant of Pat. I worked under him, or I think they had changed the name at the time to like selective enforcement or something. But he was my sergeant, and then pretty much almost a majority of our career, we were around each other, worked directly with each other. We always had an outstanding relationship. This is where like he takes it. I really don't think he means what he's saying. I think he's using it to political advantage, because he knows me better than almost everybody at that agency. All right, because of all the conversations that we've had, and him working directly with me in like the inner city environment. All right, me working under him, me supervising him in like all these different capacities. So, because I hold him to a high standard, all right, when he leaves to go seek life elsewhere and run for sheriff, I'm like, everybody that makes it to the end of their career, I'm celebrating, even if I didn't like you. But Hargrove, I looked up to a lot. So him coming to the end, it was like, I went to his, retirement at, city council chambers, and it was like, it's a great moment. Like, you've made it, dude. Like, you get to move on. And then, like with everybody, you kind of disconnect. They kind of just, everybody retiree, they just kind of move on, and we are stuck, there doing our duty. So, but then we in command staff see like what we feel like is the chief telegraphing a move coming, and then people are coming to me and saying he's bringing back Hargrove. So, but at first I'm thinking like, no, that's not true, because how it impacts his retirement. Like, why would he come back? So this is where I confronted Hargrove about. So for him to say, well, he didn't congratulate me, and then he insinuates why, is disgusting, because I'm the one that went to him and went face to face about my feelings about his return and getting deputy chief. It was a very specific conversation. He remembers it. He knows what I said. He knows my feelings because I clearly articulated them. Is one, we had clear evidence that the process was manipulated. First stage, two of the assessors, and this is another way they twist it, which is again disgusting and childish and petty, is they focus on that I have a problem with the janitor on the board. Everybody knows, from human resources to everybody internal, including them, I said janitor, records clerk, IA sergeant. 3 people continuously mentioned. They picked the janitor conveniently because it's a black male.
And it sounds the most racist.
Yes. They don't pick the records clerk because it's a white male, and they don't pick the fact that I was talking about the IA sergeant because she's a white female. I've never just concentrated on the janitor. Everybody knows that. Anybody that says that is a lie. I dare them to actually go on record about that. So I confront him about it and said 2 of the people approached me. They want to go on record. They actually want to go to speak to HR because they feel like the first stage of the process was manipulated in your favor. And I go into detail about it. I told him I've already gone to HR, presented the information to them. And so my argument to him was, how could you come back when it seems clear to me and everybody that the process was manipulated? And I told, which of course the chief has the authority to just appoint a deputy chief. And so I told him, I was like, instead of just creating some, BS process, why didn't he just appoint you? I would have problems with that, but at least you're being a little bit more honest. Like, why waste everybody's time with a show process? He said, well, I'll agree with you on that point, that the chief should have just appointed him back. And then my confusion is, like, why would you come back? Because to me, again, all the respect that I have for him, I'm like, why would you want to come back under this cloud? And he says, well, I'm doing this. And I'm like, no, Hargrove, I don't know why you're doing this. And he said, well, this enhances my resume to run for sheriff again. That's the part that the media keeps leaving out. Huh. And I don't know why. Like, in my statements, I'm like, when I'm trying to defend his accusation, I don't know why they're leaving that out. But that's specifically what he told me. And then there we had this heated conversation because I told him that was extremely selfish. People were depending upon that. Like, when at that point, Assistant Chief Euler is announcing months in advance that he's leaving. Internally, that gives all of these people below an opportunity to promote up. They all want, to rise up. So you would have had, again, a deputy chief promotion, a captain promotion, a lieutenant promotion, sergeant corporal. That's all of those people that were going to have a good opportunity coming up. But because of his selfish desire to enhance his resume, to run for a political office, in the partner agency that we work directly with, that we absolutely need, you're going to come back as their opposition? And I said, I looked at him, I said, I can't support this. I want to have nothing to do with this. So yes, from that day on, as he's walking down the hallway, am I going to be yucking it up with him in the hallway? No, because I could not tolerate it.
And how long did you overlap with him before you were gone from the department after that?
When he came back as deputy chief?
Yeah.
I would say, that was, I think, July of, so it would have been maybe 8 months, if that. But, we weren't directly, like, he wasn't my division, my bureau chief. So us running into each other was rare.
Yeah. So from what you've described about, in your own words, about the kind of person you were in the department, it sounds like you were combative at times when you disagreed with things. Had you disagreed with Hargrove on other things in the past?
Oh yeah, but it was a great debate. And one of the great debates I had with him, going all the way back to when he was like my street team sergeant, is I don't believe in the war on drugs. Okay. So we would have a lot of discussion and debate about that, because I would discuss with him the impact that it's having, like, in the inner city community and then nationally. He was front and center and probably one of the best street officers like this department ever had. All right. So he was 110% invested in that. I had serious concerns. So, like, we would have debate. We'd have debate about tactics. I would remember specific times where he had information about a subject, with this, that, or the other, and he would charge in there, and I'm more the tactically sound guy, and we would argue because I would be like, I'm not getting killed over some crack. I'm going to do it smart. I'm going to do it safe, because he would get frustrated with me at times, and then we would have a lot of discussions and debate about like evangelists, decision that we're making, everything. We would discuss politics, pretty much, that, but it was always a great back and forth.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like a very like an angry kind of combative, but I everybody knows in that department is I'm very opinionated and I love sparring with people verbally. Like I will sometimes even be like devil's advocate, like in a professional environment, and I think that kind of debate's like healthy. Sometimes I might take a little bit overboard, especially in my younger days. But you always have to respect people like that. Like I've had people like that in my division, even like younger officers, that you're discussing an operation or a plan and they're raising their hand, and it's like, oh, here we go.
I mean, I have heard from law enforcement that groupthink is deadly.
Oh, it's horrible, yeah, and that's what we have right now.
So let me get down to the meat of this. First of all, let me just ask you point blank: are you a racist?
Absolutely not.
Were there any incidents in your time at the department where this was an issue, where you were accused of being a racist?
One of the only times it came up, and I remember specific, and I would tell people about this meeting because it was one of those very odd occurrences that you have in your career, is Chief Evangelist. Like we had a great relationship. Like I would say, I don't know how many, like probably his first 7-8 years. I don't know. He calls me into his office. I was a newly appointed lieutenant, and he's he's just checking in with me. But I had a feeling like there was something else to why like he's like meeting with me, because I felt a little bit of tension. So at the end, he's like, there's something I got to talk to you about. And I was like, oh yeah, what's that? He said, high-ranking members of the department that are African-American are discussing the fact that you're like the leader of the white officers and that you're an overt racist. And he's like, what do you have to say about that? And I said, well, it didn't surprise me. And of course he's like, uh-oh, like what do we got here? He gave that kind of look. I said, well, when I walk around the corner, and everybody, whether, I love you, I hate you, I always acknowledge you by your rank. Even if you're at my rank, I don't like calling people by their like first names. It just always seemed odd in a paramilitary environment. A lot of people, at that time, different people, certain ones were African American, they would not acknowledge me. They wouldn't look at me, or if I came around the corner, they would like shut down. I didn't know why. I wasn't going to get into it. I had, friends that, like whether it was like Ben Kennedy, who ended up being my deputy chief, or Hargrove, like I had a great relationship with them. I even asked some of them at the time, like, have you ever heard that before?
These are black officers.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, you ever heard that before? And they were like, no, like that hasn't been said, to me, kind of thing. So, but the chief was like, well, how do you explain that? And I said, well, at that time, I took my job very seriously. I come off as very abrasive. I'm very direct and to the point. And I'm a newly appointed young lieutenant, and I could be very confrontational with everybody. And what I told the chief, which again, some people might say is controversial, but at that point in time, there were white male officers that would walk down the hallway, and I know for a fact they were going to hate me to the day they retired, and then probably far beyond that. And I told the chief, I said, with those guys, they're walking down the hallway saying, Fan is a effing asshole, an elitist or arrogant or whatever, and they're walking down the hallway. I said, and some people are going to walk down the hallway and they're going to say, Fan is a racist. I said, I don't know what I'm to do about that. I said, because I'm treating everybody the same across the board. I was like, I am who I am with everybody. Take it or leave it. And so I was like, that's kind of their problem and not mine.
You are not a warm, cuddly person.
At that time, definitely I wasn't.
Yeah.
I was very much, again, I was, SWAT operational kind of guy. And just, again, I was just direct, no bullshit, to the point. And again, it was, sometimes it definitely didn't go over well.
So the last part of this is Williams was making two separate arguments, I guess. One was about you and Yanisek, and I'll leave that second part to the side. Mm-hmm. But he was also arguing that this was evidence of systemic racism in the department.
Yeah.
Did you ever get the sense that was a thing, that there was either in the way things were sort of tacitly done or overtly that there were people in power who were racist? Was that going on in the department?
I had that impression when I first started in the department, because it was late 90s. You had very much, which again, what I ended up becoming was like a dinosaur. You had a lot of people that were, the men that were leading the agency came through like the civil rights movement, Vietnam veterans, whole different mindset. And I just had that feeling, but of course I avoided leadership supervisors like a plague because I'm just a grunt and I didn't want to be in and around them. But my interactions with them, I felt like, and at that time there was definitely, well, now the chief has created racial strife, but at that time there was more racial strife between like internally and also externally in the city. So it was a very big culture shock for me, naive guy that jumps into law enforcement. And but over time it felt like, there was a very much a diversity of leadership throughout the department, and it seemed like those temperatures really cooled, especially internally. So again, people could say I was naive for 29 years, but I didn't see it. And my issue with him now is he's been the chief for over 4 years. All right. First, I'm hearing of it, and I'm directly in command staff. So if that would make me question either one, again, he's deflecting from the real issue of getting into this report and looking what they really found, or two, maybe you're not the man for the job. Because if you've never mentioned it to your entire command staff that you feel like there's systemic racism, then what have you been doing about it?
I mean, just to play devil's advocate,
Yeah.
is it conceivable that he didn't feel like he was safe to bring it up until he was absolutely at the top?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. For the past 4 years, he's absolutely at the top.
Yeah.
Now he's in the position with an iron fist to implement a system. So if he had been watching this and knowing the particular players, like he, again, insinuates, with the buddy hookups or whatever he's saying, but we never hear about it.
You mean like in the general public?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then also internally, because we're all being accused of these things, and in that command staff environment, it's not all a bunch of white guys, all right? Yeah. So, like, when I would argue about this to my deputy chief, who was a black male, he would remind me sometimes, like, I'm in the room too, so he's saying it to me, and I was like, yeah, of course, I know that, and this is one of the things that the public needs to know also. When I filed my complaint, it was on the behalf of current command staff members. Some of those that I listed as additional victims are minorities, black male, Hispanic female, etc. So I initiated this complaint as a victim, but again, I listed numerous additional victims on behalf of them, knowing that I'm leaving them behind in the system. And knowing that several of them have been trying to fix this issue with human resources.
Yeah.
So that's why I want the report released, because if he's going to go around saying, "Hey, I didn't even read the report, but it's racially biased," or whatever he's saying, it's an example of a racist system. I'm like, well, then how do you say that? Like, How do you say that in the same breath? Hey, I didn't read the report, but it's racist.
Yeah. I do take the chief's point that he may not have felt comfortable addressing systemic racism as he sees it until he was chief, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But after that, I think
4 years.
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard him be as direct with the allegation that it is still alive and well in the department.
And the only example so far he's produced is, of course, the highly disturbing and devastating, Pioneer Moore, Gilmore tape. I mean, again, but that's 4 years ago. But again, at that time, that could be evidence that we got a bigger issue. I get that, but nothing's come out since then.
Okay, a little bit of a longer note here because we need some context. During the press conference held by Donny Williams, reporters, including me, were asked to leave behind our phones, cameras, and recording devices and walk into another room, where WPD staff played several recordings for us. I recognized them at the time as being from the Wilmington Crime Lab lawsuit. That's where the former lab director sued several high-ranking law enforcement officers, including Chief Williams, claiming that there was a toxic and misogynistic workplace at WPD. She argued that her truthful testimony about potentially embarrassing shortcomings at the crime lab, which could have led to hundreds of cases being dismissed, led to her being blackballed by these officials, effectively forcing her out of her job when the ownership of the crime lab was transferred from WPD to the sheriff's office. That lab director, Bethany Pridgeon, made numerous recordings to protect herself in the time leading up to the closure and transfer of the lab, which were shared with Williams and other defendants during the discovery process of this case. Williams played us one of these recordings from around 2017. It's of Pridgeon speaking with veteran officer David Yanasek, a white man. Yanasek recounts a story from even earlier, probably around 2014, where Donny Williams showed up in his street clothes to a crime scene and was mistaken for a suspect by a rookie crime scene tech. Yanasek makes several comments, including referring to Williams as a thug and a mutt. Though Yanasek has defended himself in the press, the recordings of his comments did strike me as pretty racist. Pridgeon, for her part, sounds uncomfortable, understandably perhaps, as a civilian woman speaking to a uniformed male supervisor. Now, we were played this tape for the explicit purpose of discrediting Yanasek, who had joined Fanta in publicly criticizing the chief, although, unlike Fanta, it doesn't appear that Yanasek filed a formal complaint. As Fanta noted in this interview, he does not appear in any of these recordings. It's also worth noting that Pridgeon's lawsuit, which does not cast Williams in a particularly positive light, was recently dismissed in Superior Court, but is headed for an appeal. You can find a lot more info on that case in the notes for this episode.
And then what he does is he uses, these tapes that he had been, his personal tapes or whatever he called them, that he produced from, 7 to 8 years ago. And this is something I also want to clarify. And I've tried, really push this since he had that press conference, is one, for him to tie me to that, again, is defamation.
Just to be clear, you do not appear on those tapes.
I wasn't around that unit. I'm not mentioned in those recordings. I'm not in those recordings. That is the unit that I was most far removed from my entire career. I'm not even part of that, lawsuit, because I was never in and around or even, indirectly involved in that. So for him to pull the media in and saying, hey, this is an example of he brought my name into that.
Yeah.
And hit play.
And he's playing tapes from the crime lab lawsuit that do mention him.
Yeah.
But don't mention you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that has nothing to do with me. So anybody that's going to insinuate that those recordings had anything to do with me, I will tell you to use caution.
Yeah. Just for the record, the story about Williams, and I believe this is probably back in 2014 when this happened, getting misidentified as a suspect, I could see how that would be hurtful from his point of view.
Yeah, it can happen on all spectrums, but yes, it's more likely to happen with blackmail.
It sucks.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, humiliating. I definitely wouldn't want to be put in that position. But I don't know if he's ever told us that story. So it's weird that I didn't hear that, but there's a possibility that I missed that story. But generally, he discusses that kind of stuff in command staff, so I don't know what he's talking about. But again, maybe I heard it. But yeah, I would. That's if I was in his shoes, it would be insulting, degrading. But at the same time, as a leader, you just really have to have the bigger picture, and you can't allow these things to really just, for him now to call out the agency after all this is really just, it was a shockwave throughout the department. Officers are reaching out to me that haven't reached out to me because, of course, I'm retired and gone, and they're really troubled by that, because again, they think that, again, it's a bridge too far. If we have, if you would just stuck to, these are professional differences that I had with Captain Fanta and other command staff members, I choose to run the agency, I'm going to do it, then, stick to that debate. And that's a debate that, some people would understand. But when he takes this, when he goes in this direction with it and basically, throws the entire agency under the bus, again, in my opinion, to deflect from the bigger issue of what's in this investigation, again, it's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, I have not been able to reconcile, and I've not been able to get anyone to reconcile for me, the two suggestions that, one, the department is mostly okay and there are pockets of racism, with his claim that there is systemic racism, which implies that it's department-wide.
Yeah.
or cooked into the department
you
somehow.
might have to look up the definition of systemic, but
Yeah.
because that throws the entire agency under the bus.
Yeah,
it's all in and around there, and that and again, so basically for the past 4 years, what have you done about it?
Oh, I suppose that is my takeaway, is that if he's saying it's systemic and can't put his finger on exactly where it is, it could be anyone. It is sort of like the enemy's list.
Yeah, and that's, again, maybe that was what he was thinking the entire time when he walks in there and constantly tells us, like, for those year after year, he knows what we've been doing, and, he's been watching us for years. Sometimes I took that as racially charged, and I even discussed it with my deputy chief, again, who is a black male. I'd walk out of these meetings and say, do you understand what he's saying to us? Like, how long am I supposed to tolerate this? Because, again, if you have something, be a man and deal with me specifically on it. Don't be throwing this out in a professional environment and accusing us all of this, that, and the other, day after day. But, again, I have zero evidence, zero knowledge of anyone that he's pulled in individually and dealt with. And I talked to a lot of these people because we were all just as frustrated and insulted by these comments. So again, if that's the true system, he is really bad at dealing with it because he's not dealing with the personnel then. Because again, if it's me, he never pulled me in. He never dealt with me administratively or all these other captains or deputy chiefs. Like, there's not one example I could think of. So what exactly are you doing about it if that's what you truly believe is going on? You're doing nothing. Or again, you're just making this up because you're just trying to save your skin.
Right. So the last thing I want to touch on here before we wrap up is you filed your complaint beginning of 2024.
No, I mean, well, technically, again, it's a long story. I had gone to HR numerous times.
Right, but they had always asked you to put your name to it.
Yeah, which I told, which was a lie, because you don't have to do that. They're kind of deviating from their own policy. They're kind of throwing it back to the employee. But if any employee goes to HR and brings up like hostile work environment, sexual harassment, they won't just say, well, geez, we're not going to do anything until you actually sign this form. They could initiate investigation immediately. They were hearing it through multiple sources.
Exit interviews.
They were seeing it in exit interviews. They weren't surprised at anything I was bringing forward to them. They refused to take action, not just with me, with numerous people.
The issue of anonymous complaints is a little bit unclear. According to the city of Wilmington, there isn't a policy regarding anonymous complaints. Now, the city notes that employees are protected from retaliation whenever they file a workplace violation form. That's the one that Fanta used. All formal complaints are investigated, according to the city, but those formal complaints cannot be made anonymously. Now, at the same time, there doesn't appear to be any city policy preventing investigations by HR or the city manager's office based on anonymous complaints. So, again, a little unclear.
So, I technically say I tried to file a complaint multiple times, but I was basically unwilling at that time to put my name to it because, again, we don't have trust in the system, and they really proved and demonstrated why we shouldn't have trust in the system. So, but at the end, it was employees coming to me and saying, you're in the best position to do this, all right, and because I'm leaving. And at first I was mad, and I said, that's not how I'm going out. I'm not working like doing a 29-year career and going out, throwing out a hostile work environment complaint, because, again, long story, but I had challenged the chief on this, and I told him about this, and all the people in command staff, they know, I had tried to unify an effort to deal with this. And I told him this is the system that I wanted. The captains and deputy chiefs, we meet individually, like we meet as a group. We come up with a list of priorities. And then we schedule a meeting with him, give him the information in advance, like bullet points. Hey, we need to meet about this, that, and the other. Bring him in and let's challenge him directly in a professional environment. But again, not ambush him. Like, let's get on the same page. Give him the opportunity to understand where we're coming from. But again, reasonable or unreasonable, everybody said, like, no way we're going to do that. He's just going to retaliate. You're just going to make it worse. But I would get so mad because I was like, I'm tired of just hiding from this, So what gave me the justification in my heart was random happenstance, he calls me into his office, December 29th. He accuses me in front of my deputy chief of undermining him. So at that point, I'm like, stop. Explain that. And he's like, well, it's just a feeling that I've had. I've been feeling that you've been undermining me since the very beginning. I said, no, you're not doing this anymore. Like, you need to start giving me specifics. And then he doesn't give me any. Okay, so he worked with me for 29 years, and now you're accusing me of being a racist, but you got a black male deputy chief sitting next to me, and there's this now racist white captain who's directly challenging you, is supposedly undermining you, and you won't give me any specific examples. So at that point I said, well, I know you've been undermining me since the very beginning. And he was like, well, like how? And I was like, okay, well, how far do you want to go back? And I give him specific examples of the, basically like the threats, the exclusion, kind of thing where we're left out of decision making. And that's when I brought it out. I was like, and he at that point opens up that he knows like there's this effort to go to like HR, and he even threatens that or I wouldn't say it's a threat. He basically said, I could have dealt with you for that, but I didn't, which I'm like, I didn't say it, but I'm thinking like, no, you can't discipline me for going outside the agency to HR. Like, don't even go there. But, so I lay out these concerns, and I'm begging him, like, you got to stop. You got to understand, like, I'm washing my hands of you guys is what I told him. I said, because it's such a toxic environment and I'm getting the hell out of here. I was like, but you have to understand the environment that you've created, and you have an opportunity to turn this around. I was like, just for the love of God, dude, like, do what you can do here and try to fix this. So that's a Friday afternoon. Next Monday is command staff. I'm not supposed to be there. I'm immediately told right before by Deputy Chief Kennedy, like, he has ordered you to be there, which I was like, Ben Kennedy, I'm like, I'm not supposed to be there. I had a prior appointment. So I go there, and I walked in there, and I told my, some of my fellow command staff members, I said, I have a feeling this is going to be about what I said Friday. And he doubles down on those undermining, and you would have been, taking this and that. And I was like, that's it. Like, at that point, I felt better about this. I said, because I confronted him face to face, which is kind of a requirement in my book. I cannot stand attacking somebody from behind until I've had the ability to confront you first. And now that I had done that, I felt that it was the right thing to do, because again, like, I realized he's never going to change. It's just going to get worse. They're all exhausted. And maybe I could make a difference, like, going out for them, not for me. I mean, because, like, what do I get out of this? I mean, I'm 8 months into retirement, and here I am still talking about this crap. So, it's definitely not done me any benefit, and especially with what they've done to my reputation by plastering it, all throughout the media, which I knew that was a possibility, but it's different when you actually see it and hear it, but, it was the right thing to do, I guess.
So you retired. You did put your name to a complaint, and you did hear, as I take it, not specifics, but that some parts of your complaints were sustained.
Yeah, and of course they don't. When I go into the threats, exclusion, and insults, I broke it down to those 3 categories, and I had specifics about all that, but we have no information about like all of those or some of them, And I know that they did broaden out the investigation into other, issues and concerns that weren't even in my spectrum of, control. So it's probably a lot bigger than that, is what I'm imagining. Not just that, but they at least, saying that until they tell me otherwise, they've sustained all of my complaints. That's the way I'm going to take it, But, going back real quick is that I filed this as I left, was crystal clear to Human Resources, saying, this isn't an exit interview. I'm doing exactly now what you have been asking us to do. I have a meeting laying it all out. I'm telling them I'm going to sign the form. The employee tells me, actually, we have everything we need. We're moving forward with a manager's level investigation. Totally not necessary. But I said, I'll sign it now, or I'll sign it before I leave. He said, not necessary. I'm recording that. So a couple of weeks after I leave, because I still have these communications with people internally, I realized that things are going bad still. and actually getting worse to a certain degree. So I go send an email to HR saying, hey, what's the status on my investigation? I get a lengthy email back from them saying, at no point in time did you ever try to initiate a formal investigation. Thank you for your service, kind of like an F off. So I had to email back and, kind of being a little bit more crystal clear that, like, you might want to change your story on that, because I could prove otherwise. And then about a week or two later, I got the response that an investigator would be reaching out to me. And then I realized that they were actually going to follow up with like a third-party investigation. So at that point, I think I kind of really, forced them to take the right steps, which is disgusting. A win to a certain degree, but I shouldn't have to force HR to take the right steps. It's just absolutely, they are actually the worst part of this story, in my opinion. Because you take Chief Williams out, another leader can come in, is that this is how ineffective our HR is, which that's a bigger conversation. And I think they'll go into that in that investigation too, hint, hint. So is that they're, they're there to protect the employees, not to protect an employee, Yeah. So they definitely didn't help. Not an ally over there.
Well, those are my questions, and that's about an hour. Anything else you would want to say?
No, I just, again, I would caution, them further pushing this issue and, taking these like subtle or not so subtle jabs. I would caution some of the, current employees that are posting on their social media that they might want to get some facts before they start putting it out there, because people are sending me the information that they're posting and I'm saving it for a potential, lawsuit. Would prefer not to go in that direction, but if they force me in that direction, I'll do my best to seek justice in that, spectrum, because I'm not, again, you can complain about my style, or you can complain about, the fact that I'm an asshole, or we have professional disagreements, but, don't twist it to that. You have no ability to do that.
Fair enough.
All right.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of the Newsroom. My thanks to my guest, former WPD Captain Mike Fanta. Thanks as well to the City of Wilmington and WPD for answering some of our follow-up questions. Again, this is a very complex story, and so if you're looking for more clarity, more details, or some backstory, we'll have links on the show page at whqr.org. I'm Ben Schachtman. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me for the next edition of the Newsroom.